We live in a fantasy world now. Reality has been destroyed.
This is the time that we really need to pay attention.
The probabilities are overwhelmingly on gold's side. That is the best environment to see gold increase its value.
Welcome to Palisade's Gold Radio. I'm your host, Tom Bodrovics. Joining me today is Martin Armstrong from Armstrong Economics. Marty, thanks for joining me today.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
It's always a pleasure to speak to you. And I'd like to start today by asking you about basically how many, let's say, geopolitical shifts and events and pieces of news are coming out right now. You know, there seems to be just one thing day after day, from, let's say, the fall of the Assad regime in Syria to the Ukrainian conflict heating up and becoming more kinetic. So do you see this as a time where more is happening faster? And, you know, are we maybe heading for some sort of a larger, more dramatic crescendo to this time?
Yes, I mean, that's what our computer's been forecasting going into 2032. It's basically people are, I would say, reflecting more on our forms of government being republic. I mean, they call us, oh, we're in democracy, but we're not. Democracy means we should be able to vote on an issue. Nobody asks us, do you want to go to war with Russia? Yes or no? They make the decisions. And so that's what a republic really is. And even the Pledge of Allegiance that we used to have to say in schools, and it says, and the flag for the republic for which it stands. Republic. It doesn't say democracy. So people, I think, are getting to the point. This is why Trump won. You're seeing AfD in Germany rising. People are just fed up with, with governments in general. I can run for Congress and I can say whatever you want to hear. I'll save the whales. I'll make it not rain on Sundays or something. Whatever you want to hear. Then I get there. And day one, there's a meeting. Okay. And then they say, congratulations, glad you're here. Now here's how it works. And just look at the votes. They're damn party line. You're told how to vote. Here's the issue. And the issue is decided in the back room. So we don't even have a real representative government. This is what people are talking about, which is the deep state. All right. It's the bureaucrats that are there, unelected. They make the decisions. When you look at even how they created the EU, they love to say, oh, Putin's a dictator. Okay, well, the head of the EU is also not elected. All right, she's appointed by the other heads of state. Mm-hmm. All right, she never stands for election. Then you have all these committees that actually make the laws for the EU. None of them are elected. This is the deep state. It's the bureaucrats that are always there. And I think this is what's leading the world to great frustration. You can look at the Democrats. I mean, they're all like pointing fingers at each other. Oh, it was the woke agenda. No, it wasn't woke. It was, Biden didn't step down soon enough. Nobody's going to accept blame. So each little group is blaming the other group. But effectively, people are just getting very frustrated with government in general. And that's why they did vote for Trump. Mainly because he's not a politician. And the way they look at it, they filed so many, suits against him for everything from, you can imagine. Oh, that will discredit him and nobody will vote for him. This is really what they thought. And then they use the psychological war tactic. Like you went after Saddam Hussein, oh, he's gassing his people. They said the same thing as Assad, Putin. You have to demonize your opponent. And that gets people, oh, yeah, they're all Iranians are bad. All Russians are bad. And they use that against Trump. And even Jamie Dimon stood up at Davos and said, you can't insult half the country. They're deplorables. They're this. And he even stood up and said, look, I'm barely a Democrat anymore. Mm-hmm. That type of tactic is very detrimental. And then you Camilla, there was somebody at a rally and talked about abortion, and her response was, "You're at the wrong rally." I actually have a meeting later today with a bunch of state and local type politicians, and they're beginning to see what is actually happening. Somebody starts a small business and he's always trying to expand it. Okay. That's a human nature. Now take that same human nature and put it in government. And what happens? They always want to expand it. Mm-hmm. Look at every financial crisis. And they call in the SEC. Oh, well, we could have prevented it if we had this power. And then the next one comes. Well, we could have prevented this one if we had this power. Next thing you know, they have all power. So, I mean, this is unfortunate, but this is the way it happens. And then governments become dictatorial. You take the abortion issue. It was being presented that federally we have to dictate it, where the Supreme Court was correct. Give it back to the states. The United States, the states were supposed to be, retain their sovereignty. Mm-hmm. The Bible Belt very much against your offending their religion with abortion. You can't walk in there and say, all right, fine. No, you're wrong. And screw your religion. It's going to be this way. Mm-hmm. That creates civil unrest. So it's the centralized government, which always fails. Even if you look at Russia, most people don't know the history of that. But if you look at Lenin was actually trying to copy the United States. Communism, yes, but he was looking at it as a confederation, and that each republic would retain its sovereignty. Mm-hmm. And he even wrote a letter, do not let Stalin succeed me. And in Russia, it's widely assumed that Stalin poisoned him and his wife, seized power. And then what did he do? He centralized it, took it all away from the states. It's now Moscow is going to dictate everything to everybody. That's what's happening in Washington and Brussels. It's the same pattern. Once they get a taste of that power, they always want more. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, what you're looking at is taking place on a global scale. People are just getting fed up with this centralized type control, whether it's left, right, doesn't matter. You take the Middle East. It's a powder keg. Why? Because after World War I, we created that. We carved up the Ottoman Empire, and we made the states of Iraq and Syria, etc. And we stuck in dictators. Why did they have to be dictators? Because they were all different tribes. Mm-hmm. They were not a country. And so in Syria, you got the Druze, and I mean, Kurds, and you had that. Oh, Iraq was gassing the Kurds. They're tribal. Okay, it's not the same thing. And you see the same situation in Ukraine. Zelensky basically, it was Kiev that started the civil war on the directions of Victoria Nuland, and they were trying to bait Russia in. The Donbass are Russians.
Mhm.
They've been there for hundreds of years. Khrushchev is the one that rebuilt Kiev after World War II. His successor, Brezhnev, was born in the Donbass. So now you're saying that's not Russia? And then Zelensky outlaws their religion. You'll no longer practice Eastern Orthodox to the Patriarch of Moscow. You're going to be subservient to my Patriarch in Kiev. And by the way, Christmas will now be December 25th. And outlaw their language.
Mhm.
I mean, look at the English Civil War. The Puritans beheaded the king. Well, they outlawed Christmas. Why? Because you're supposed to be praying, not giving gifts. That was their view. They outlawed sports because that leads to cursing. Outlaw all plays because it's lying. That's why the Puritans got chased out.
Mhm.
They came to America and they were the Pilgrims. But whenever you get this type of pattern of a centralized government trying to force their socialistic ideas, religious ideas, or whatever, it's no longer a free state. Philadelphia was the example of that. There were synagogues, there were Catholic churches, there were Protestant churches. Everybody was allowed to commingle.
Mhm.
That's what when you start dictating things of this nature. What happens if a Muslim gets elected president, he outlaws Christianity? I mean, you can't do this kind of stuff.
Mhm. Marty, before we hit record here this morning, you were telling me that Trump and RFK are very anti-war. Do you think that they are going to be effective in actually stopping these wars as let's say the rhetoric of coming in and putting an end to them on day one will be?
Yes, look, I did go to dinner down at Mar-a-Lago back in March of 2020 when Trump was president. I met many heads of state, and that's when he actually impressed me. He said he wanted to pull the troops out of Afghanistan, but it was the reason. He said that he was sick and tired of writing letters to their parents, your son died for God and country or whatever. And he said, what are we doing there? They've been fighting over borders for 1,000 years. And he literally said, what difference are we going to make? I've spoken directly to RFK and had a conversation. He says, how would you end Ukraine? I mean, so I know these are personal conversations I had. So I know one-on-one, what he was really considering. And the press has always been against him for vaccines and conspiracy theories with JFK. I'm sorry, the JFK stuff is correct. He was taken out because he wanted to break up the CIA. Everybody knew that. And even Richard Nixon. I can say I met Richard Nixon on the beach in New Jersey. He would go down to Long Beach Island. And I was surprised. This was after he left office. And what I was surprised about was that there was no Secret Service.
Mhm.
There were a couple guys, and it just stuck in my mind. And you Google it, you'll see the CIA probably took him out as well. Why? Because there was a tape. He had the head of the CIA in. He says, I know who killed JFK. All right. And he also wanted to break up the CIA, the CIA. They were into regime changes and assassinating leaders to pull off their nonsense. And if you look at Watergate, who were the guys that got caught? CIA guys. You know, I mean, they could have got a couple guys from the hood would have done a better job, you know, professional, you know, criminals or whatever. But, oh, gee, you got me. How about that? Yeah, I was with the CIA, but Nixon told me to do this, you know. What I was surprised about, and you can Google it, when Richard Nixon left office, he declined Secret Service protection. He hired his own. Why? He didn't trust the government. So there's a lot more behind the curtain than people think about, and mainstream media is not going to tell you.
Mhm.
You know, they keep calling it, you know, the JFK conspiracies. You know, very nice, but it's that's just not the way it works.
Mhm.
I mean, so there are people that will fight tooth and nail. You create an agency, and they will do everything to retain that power. Back in the 80s, I told them, look, we have to merge the SEC and CFTC. I said, because if I manage money according to the SEC, I can't combine a fund to do futures because I would go to jail with the other one. I said, the regulations are completely opposite. I said, if you do not merge them, you're going to send everybody offshore, which became the hedge fund industry. And I was told back then, oh, we can't do that because we'd have to lay off 50,000 people. That's it.
Mhm.
It's not that it's good for the people. I became one of the first hedge fund managers. And what's the difference? Domestically, you go to a fund manager, he does bonds. Another one does equity. Another one does futures. Another one does gold or whatever. They don't do it combined because they can't.
Mhm.
So everyone is going to tell you, like a used car salesman, this was driven by a little old lady and it's great, you know. So you have to have the expertise. Should I be in bonds? Should I be in stocks? Should I be in commodities? Where should I be? In the International Hedge Fund, you came to me. I made that decision. So I could do everything. I'd have a portion of bonds. I'd have this, that, whatever, currencies. That's what a fund manager was really supposed to be doing.
Mhm.
You're supposed to be the expert that makes those decisions for them, not just give me some money and, you know, and hopefully my asset will be better than the other guys. You know, but and NATO is the same thing. And I've said on other shows, I've seen the memos. NATO was very upset that the money was going to climate change. And they were actually basically debating, how do we remain relevant? NATO should have been shut down
Mhm.
when communism fell. Its whole purpose was to defend Europe against communism. Well, communism collapsed. All right. Even Jamie Dimon at Davos stood up and said Trump was right about the border and he was right about NATO. All right. NATO is a threat to world peace because to keep their funding, they have to keep beating the war drums. You know, and what do they say? Oh, Putin, if Putin takes Ukraine, he'll come after the rest of Europe. The Russian people don't want that. I mean, come off it. This is like from 1950s Khrushchev era. You know, we will bury you. You know, that's long gone. Putin has no such desire because he knows it wouldn't fly with the Russian people.
Mhm.
He was so popular because when Yeltsin turned to him, he wasn't a communist, and he wasn't an oligarch. The Russian people did not want to go back to communism. Same thing in Eastern Europe. So, they have to beat the war drums and keep advocating war, because that's all they're there for.
So maybe a better way to phrase that question is, do you think Trump and RFK might be effective against NATO in ending these wars?
I certainly hope so. They understand the problem, and NATO was out just a few months ago. You can Google that up. They were trying to raise $100 billion to Trump-proof the war. That was the slogan. All right. And it shows what I'm talking about. They were afraid that Trump was going to come in and cut off all the funding. Mm-hmm. And even RFK said, I expressed my opinion. I said, look, yes, I agree. Cut off the funding, and look, the Ukrainian people what do they stand to gain out of this? Nothing. 1 million have died. They don't want to report that number. When I first reported, in the first couple of months, I said 100,000 Ukrainians are dead. Oh, that's Russian propaganda. Well, then Ursula stood up and said 100,000 were dead. Zelensky made her take it out, and I have both videos of her speech. So that's classified information. My information was coming from Ukraine. We had 2 employees in Ukraine, all right, one on each side. And it's not Russian propaganda. They want to make it sound like all Russians die, but no Ukrainians, so keep giving us more money because we're winning. I think that's what Churchill said. In war, the first victim is basically the truth, and it needs a lot of bodyguards of lies to protect it. But they are definitely against that. There is nothing that to gain out of this. I've argued for a long time that if we just look at history, the only people that created world peace was the Romans. How? All right. Pax Romana lasted for like 1,000 years, mainly because when they did conquer a country, it was beneficial to them. Mm-hmm. They were now part of a common market. They could make a vase in France and sell it to somebody in Syria. There was no trade restrictions. There was, the taxation was 7%. That was it. If you left the Roman Empire, you couldn't sell anything anymore. That's the key. All right. We were closer to world peace before these neocons got a hold of the Biden administration. As long as China is selling us their pink umbrellas for our fancy drinks, and Russia's selling it, then those people are going to be against their own government from starting any war. Hey, you start this, I lose my business. You can see it in the American Civil War, the same thing. They passed laws that if you owed anybody any money in the South, you were not allowed to pay them. So, stamp collectors will find a letter that has a northern stamp and a southern stamp on the same letter because they wouldn't recognize one side or the other. This is just human nature. Mm-hmm. If you just study the way peace is created and war is created, it jumps right out at you. The sanctions on Russia was really brain dead. But this is the way politicians look at it. Oh, we'll put sanctions, that will hurt them. Okay, fine. You put the sanctions on Russia, and then what? Energy prices doubled. Okay, so people who had stickers at the gas pumps, with Biden pointing the finger, I did that, they don't understand we're all connected. Mm-hmm. Whatever happens in one section of the globe ultimately ripples through to the rest. You can't, I'm against Trump with his tariffs. And basically, he had somebody tell him, look, before the income tax, we funded the government with tariffs, but there was no socialistic agenda. All right. So the government wasn't that big. It was when socialism got involved, then everything really started to fall apart. But so there's no way that would happen anyhow. We no longer even need taxation. Historically, you needed taxation because when money was gold and silver coin, the king had to get some back to respend. And the idea that we borrow rather than print was, in theory, that you didn't increase the money supply, but they do. We run deficits all the time, and then you fund the deficit by borrowing. So you're still increasing the money supply, because if you want to trade gold futures or whatever, you can post T-bills. Okay, so it's money that just pays interest. That's it. So this year we got interest expenditures of about $1 trillion. And then next year we're going to pay interest on that trillion. All right. This is compounding it out. All right. And it's not a sustainable system. It's just not. The defaults come when you can't sell the new debt to pay off the old. As long as there's a line of people still willing to buy the old debt, the debt could be a quadrillion. It doesn't matter. It's when that confidence collapses. And usually that corresponds to war. Because when you create war, what happens? The deficits go up. It was the Vietnam War that brought down Bretton Woods. So, it's just crazy.
Martin, you bring up a point that I really wanted to get to, and we can kind of tie this in with the announcement from Argentina that Milei has posted the first, the first budget surplus in 123 years due to his contempt for the state and by cutting a lot of spending. And I wanted to ask you if you think that this is something that is even directionally possible in the US with Elon and Vivek and their Doge committee. Is that something that is even possible to kind of turn the direction towards, or is the collapse of the US dollar basically imminent or unavoidable at this point, not imminent?
Well, look, Biden put in this agency that was supposed to create all these electric things to charge cars and all these mandates for. Nobody wants the cars anyhow. I can tell you here in Florida, just a guy about 10 doors from me had a Tesla in his garage, and when the storm came, it blew up. Saltwater doesn't like electric cars, and then took his whole house down. All the cars that were destroyed down here. One dealer had 100 electric cars. They all had to be scrapped. Not a good thing. So here you have Biden issued this dictate that they have to produce these electric cars, and I'm going to authorize electric chargers throughout the country. Spent all this money. Not one has been produced. Not one. Even look at some of the charities. You donate money to this or whatever. And what are the administration costs? You'll see 70% goes to administration. people to decide, well, who do I give this dime to, and that cost me 20 cents to make that decision. So there's so much waste. You can look up, it really started with Jimmy Carter in the late 70s. What he did was every agency had to go annually and say, this is going to be our budget, this is what we need money for. And he thought he would streamline that. Whatever they got money for the previous year, if they spent it, it was just automatically renewed. All right. Then they were indexed to the CPI. And the CPI back then was rising at like 15, 20%. So these agencies were getting huge increases in money. All right. That's why they manipulate the CPI today, because they realize, they kept changing the formulas constantly. And that actually brings down government spending. But once he put it on automatic pilot, I can tell you there are warehouses at Fort Dixon, New Jersey, filled with computers that probably should be in the Smithsonian. Because at the end of the fiscal year, if they didn't spend whatever they had, they just wasted it. They bought stuff they didn't need and threw it in a warehouse. So they made sure they had the same amount of money next year. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are warehouses full of stuff. I mean, it kind of looks like that scene from, Raiders of the Lost Ark, where they're taken into that warehouse. I mean, it's like that. There is so much waste in government. They're incapable of running an efficient bubblegum machine. They can't. Mm-hmm. There's no supervision. There's unions. I heard from one postmaster, the union prevents them from actually inspecting a postman unannounced. They have to tell you, okay, I'm going to be checking on you on Thursday. So on Thursday, he shows up. All right. And he told me that basically they were getting these complaints about this one guy, missing checks, etc. And somebody put a private investigator on him and saw that he was just taking all the mail and dumping it in a river and going off and having a nice day. Mm-hmm. The postmaster couldn't do that. All right. So, I mean, this is what I mean. It's the unions have got it locked up every which way from Sunday. So it's just, there's so much waste and corruption. Look, I was told when back when they were forming the G5 and I wrote to Reagan and, you went out of committee and all this other, no, you won't be called again. Why can't you be a good boy? And you could make $5 million a year just doing these studies. And I said, no, thanks. I don't like writing fiction, they basically, every bill that is passed, they need an economic study. And they tell you what it's supposed to say. And so you get paid for writing fiction. That's it. Oh, Obamacare. Yes, that will save $1 trillion over 100 years, whatever. It's just nonsense. They're not independent economic studies at all. Because if you don't put out what they want to hear, you don't get paid. Mm-hmm.
So you don't think they're going to be able to cut much from the federal spending?
I am concerned looking at the computer that it's showing markets are going down rather than up. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of people saw this as, Trump's coming in. We're going to get the big Trump rally. The computer's like saying no. I don't know what that means. Does it mean that they're going to try to assassinate him a third time? And that's a charm? or they're just really going to obstruct absolutely everything they possibly can. I have heard that there's going to be a big protest on his inauguration day. They want to make it so bad that he's forced to call out the National Guard, and that then they can say, see, he's a dictator. Mm. This is the nonsense. We're not what's good for the country. That's when Biden took office, the very first day he opened the border with an executive order. I can tell you, being here in Florida, the military base in Tampa was the one that is in charge of overseeing the Middle East. Trump wanted to get out of Afghanistan and had them create a committee to investigate how to exit. Biden came in. Oh, Trump hired them. They're all fired. Just get out. Mm-hmm. And look at the mess that took place. It's what took place in the Biden administration was appalling. It's like, regardless of what it was, if Trump did it, you got to do the opposite. Good, bad, or indifferent. I mean, there was just no logical thinking to this. And that's the mess that we got.
Marty, you recently wrote an article about somewhat covert changes put forward by the Biden White House in regards to the National Armed Services Committee. Is this a preparation for this kind of civil war that you've brought up a couple times?
Yes, this is a very, very serious issue, and I don't think it's getting really any airtime. They can't take all the guns away from individuals. That's the Second Amendment. So what are they doing? They're taking the ability of, the National Guard goes back to, was created in 1903, federal funding of state militias. Once that took place, then they had to comply with standards from Washington, et cetera, and they would be supervised by people who would be going in from the military. Once you take a dime from them, there's always strings attached. Now what they're doing is they're clearly worried about civil war. I mean, there in Canada, your newspapers have been even saying, "Will the United States go into civil war?" There's a lot of actual people talking about this. Maybe not in the mainstream press, but behind the curtain, they are. And so what they're doing is they're trying to usurp the National Guard from the states, and so that they would then be called out only according to the federal military. Why? Because of the 1878 Act, they cannot send military against civilians. So that's the National Guard. Can't. So if the feds now control the National Guard, they can send the National Guard from, basically 45 states against the ones that want to secede. All right, we can't send the military, but we could send the National Guard. This is basically a preparation for civil war. Mm. And they're trying to disarm the states. That's really what this is about. And you've heard it from both sides. I think, California is like, oh, if Trump's elected, we want to secede. Alaska said, if Trump's not elected, we secede. I mean, it's, you're hearing this from a lot of different places. So it's the fact that it's even being said is definitely feeding into this views that will the United States go into civil war? Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's going to be really the case, but we have rising civil discontent. Our computer it's been phenomenal in forecasting elections and rise and fall of countries and stuff because it's unbiased.
Mhm.
And my concern is that it was warning that the 2024 election may be the very last. And then it's also been warning that the Democratic Party could go extinct because they're all fighting with each other and splits and become something else. And maybe if there's a woke party, I don't know. I mean, this is not unusual either. I mean, you had the Federalists basically ended up losing 6 times and they ended up collapsing. The party of Jefferson was called the Democratic Republican Party. That split for the Civil War. So that gave us the Democrats were in the South and the Republicans were in the North. So these things are not, speculation or conspiracy theories. It's just historical fact. So, I mean, when you look at the Democrats, they are arguing amongst each other. Oh, it's your fault. No, it's his fault. No, it's this one. When you start getting internal disputes like that, and you see an awful lot of Democrats are starting to jump ship and say, no, I'm no longer, a Democrat. I'm over. I mean, even Jamie Dimon at Davos said, I'm barely a Democrat. As many of the people that I know that would have been traditionally Democrat voted mainly for Trump, and you ask them why, and it was all the woke agenda stuff. I know which bathroom to use. I mean, stuff like this. I mean, it went too far. Like I've said, in Thailand, that's the sex change capital of the world, but they call themselves ladyboys.
Mhm.
They don't say, I'm a woman and you can't call your mother a mother. That's offensive to me. And I mean, I don't know where all this crazy stuff went.
Mhm.
But it offended a lot of people. So, I mean, but you're looking at civil unrest rising globally. You're seeing the same thing in Europe. Discontent over the whole Ukrainian war stuff. We have staff from around the world. Our German staff had a friend that was 60 years old and told to report for military duty. It's getting crazy. I mean, it's everywhere. The French government, collapsing. The German government collapsed one day after Trump was elected. Why? Because they were so pro-Ukrainian war that all of a sudden we're not going to have that money from Trump. Maybe we're on the wrong side. Oh no! And then government collapses, and you just had basically the PM run over to Ukraine and handing them 650 million euros for the month. Oh, we're going to be your strongest supporters. It's just, everywhere you look, it's just like, what the hell is going on here? Britain, I mean, locking up people for 20 months in prison because they said, I'm sick and tired of my tax dollars going to migrants that rape our children. That's 20 months in jail for saying that. I mean, I don't know. It's like the whole fabric is just falling apart. But it's on a global scale. You're seeing that in Canada, West versus East. Trudeau. It's just, I think it's a rising trend of against government. And that's why I say what our computer's projecting, for 2032 will be a new form of government. I'm hoping it will be more towards a direct democracy. Schwab is trying to push it with his Great Reset into an authoritarian regime. But I mean, this is what happens. Eventually, no matter what form of government, it becomes corrupt. And at that stage in the game, people eventually get fed up and they want to change it. So last time we abandoned monarchy, we went to unfortunately a republic instead of a democracy. But the founding fathers, they were influenced by the Greek philosophers who said, "Oh, democracy's bad because people are too stupid to vote." So I mean that's basically what I think the computer is showing. Trump victory is part of that. That discontent that is rising, but this is global. Malay in Argentina, you saw. I mean, it's everywhere. We need change.
Martin, you've mentioned before and also write about 2032 as being a date you see as the end game. How do you see this playing out? And does this end up meaning basically a worldwide depression?
The depression will probably come before. And what, the difference between a recession and a depression is what collapses. A recession basically is the stock market goes down. And you get the flight to quality, you go to government bonds. And depression is when government debt defaults. And you think about it, it's like the bank, reserves, pension funds, all have to have government debt. So you undermine the government debt, and what happens? You have a depression. You're affecting everything, right? Stock market goes down 20, 30%. It's not a depression. The Great Depression was basically all of Europe defaulted, South America defaulted, most of Asia defaulted in 1931. Mm-hmm. You can buy a lot of their bonds, on eBay. That took down 9,000 banks. That's a depression. Mm-hmm. Stock market doesn't do that. But unfortunately, a lot of people looked at just the stocks and said, "Oh, that's why," and that's not true. But we're at the point where it is starting to rise to the surface. If you look behind the curtain a little bit at France, government debt went above corporate. So people were starting to wake up and say, wait a minute, do I trust this government? And corporate rates were now lower than federal debt of France. To make it worse, French interest rates, government interest rates, went above that of Greece. And Greece was supposed to be the basket case in 2010. Mm-hmm. All right. So this is what I've been, the computer's been projecting. It's a shift from public to private. And you're seeing it live. As you start getting into wars and things of this nature, you don't want government debt. Mm-hmm. Federal, state, local, doesn't matter. So you get that shift. And that's what we're really looking at. So we're probably looking at more of a depression area going into like 2028. And 32 is most likely the change, the reaction to that. Mm-hmm. So it's not that we're okay until then. After this turn here in 2024, it starts getting interesting. As I said, a lot of people were expecting this to be the Trump rally and everything's going to go up. Look, I wish him all the luck. But the computer does not necessarily say that's going to be the case. So I would be very, very concerned about this. The Fed and all central banks, they're in trouble. The whole idea of Keynesian economics has collapsed. It was created back in the 30s when the US government had a balanced budget. So you raised interest rates, lowered interest rates, it affected demand, which we were. Today, the government's the biggest borrower in the room. Mm-hmm. So the Fed raises interest rates to lower inflation. Guess what? It didn't work. Interest expenditures went up. The Fed cut rates aggressively because it sees it's actually going up. I think inflation for November came in at like 2.7, went up, not down. And the Fed lowering interest rates, well, so everything else is going to go up. You'll reduce the government interest rates, but nobody in government, oh, gee, the Fed is raising interest rates, so they want us to spend less. Never going to happen. They're this is what's problem with socialism. It's bribing the people to vote. Vote for me, and I'll steal it from this guy, and I'll give it to you. That's really what they're saying. I mean, I was there in Vancouver. I forget her name, but one of your socialistic politicians there actually had the audacity to say that everything you earn belongs to the state, and the state decides how much you're allowed to keep. I mean, we're economic slaves. That's it. This is why there shouldn't be career politicians, because when they're on that side of the game. They only see the world through their eyes and nobody else's. We've become largely the biggest international advisory firm because we did currencies and we had to look at everything through everybody else's eyes. And that's why I've said, look, a bull market is when something is rising in terms of all currencies. If it's, you take Bitcoin, people didn't understand. It got off the ground. Look at most of the volume. It was coming out of China. They were using it for money laundering. That was it, to get money out. The same thing is going on with Europe right now. But, it's the same thing as, it's just a digital form of gold in the sense that it's the same commodity trading everywhere. Mm-hmm. So that makes it available to buy here and sell there.
Marty, how do you think Trump can force the BRICS countries to keep using the US dollar, as he tweeted, that needs to come to an end? How does he do that without completely isolating the US from the rest of the world, as really he threatened to do by, putting 100% tariffs on everything?
He can't. Mm-hmm. Look, Trump, unfortunately, is listening to the old theories. All right. And he doesn't understand what makes the dollar the reserve currency to begin with. All right. It's the fact that we have the biggest economy in the world because it is a consumer-based economy. So that meant Germany needs to manufacture cars to sell it to Americans. Japan did, China does. All right. I mean, I testified before the House Ways and Means Committee back in '96. They were asking me why no American company got any of the contracts to construct the Yellow River Dam in China. And I said, look, because you tax worldwide income, Germany does not. So a German company bidding on the same project in China is already 30 to 35% cheaper. And they just look at you with their mouth open, you know. And I'll say this, you know, publicly, Trump is absolutely wrong. And you impose all these tariffs, that's what our computer is probably forecasting. We're going into a depression on a global scale. You raise these tariffs, then what happens? All right. Their economies go down. Once their economies go down, they drag us with it. Mm-hmm. We're all connected. All right. It's not tariffs. Yes, eliminate the income tax. Just do that. All right. The American companies will come home. Mm-hmm. 70%, which nobody looks at, but about 70% of the so-called trade deficit, all right, is American companies bringing home their own goods. If you allocate trade according to the flag the company flies, we have a trade surplus, not a trade deficit. Mm-hmm. All right. Why did they move offshore? It's not because, oh, gee, I'm paying $2 an hour to this guy versus $5. That's not it. It's the taxes. You know, I became friends with Maggie Thatcher because she had heard there was this guy putting all these companies in Britain. I happen to have known her personal economic advisor was Sir Alan Walters. And he said, yeah, that's Martin. She's, you know him? Yeah. And that's how I got to meet Maggie. And I explained to her, I said, look, I'm putting everybody that needs skilled labor in Britain, the car manufacturers, etc. Why? Because basically, if I put them in Germany, the cost for an employee is 40% higher. Mm-hmm. Not the wages, it's the regulations. So, and then I said, I put nobody in France, I put nobody in Germany. All right. If the airlines that needed the best tax deals, I put them in Ireland. That's what companies do. They come to us and say, what should we be doing? Where we go? Whatever. Because we're looking at the entire world. We've got, you know, law firms around the world that are on retainer that basically, if any laws are changing, we're notified. So we have to be on point with everybody. We're dealing on a global scale. So when you look at this, it's you understand why capital moves and what are the decisions. You know, if the stock market's going up 20%, but the currency is going down 50%, a foreigner's not going to invest there. You know, oh, that's fine. I made 20% on the stock, but I lost 50% on the currency. You know? Mm-hmm. You have to be making money in both ways. And so it's, I mean, I've had conferences where I remember one in Zurich, a guy from Canada came over. He said, I wanted to be here because I wanted to see what you're saying over here. And it made it interesting because they said, okay, fine. Yes, you should be buying, but you should be selling based upon their currency. Mm-hmm. When you're getting currencies moving 20, 30, 40%, that's a big issue. Mm-hmm. So with BRICS, what created it? It was the sanctions. All right. Once you put sanctions on Russia, it was a red flag warning to everybody else. If you do not do as we order you to, we'll remove you from SWIFT. Mm-hmm. Okay. That's why China began its chip system. All right, it's self-defense. So BRICS had nothing to do with gold and the dollar and all this other kind of nonsense. And people, oh, it's going to displace the dollar. They said that about the euro. Impossible. All right. What makes the dollar is the fact that this is the market that everybody has to sell to.
Mhm.
Simple as that. It's the biggest economy in the world. If you're not going to sell to America, sorry, you're not going to, you're not going to be much. Now, our computers also forecast that China will displace the United States as the capital of the world. How can you, look, I'm just forecasting what the computer's saying. It's not my personal opinion. And I may be an American, fine. I necessarily don't want to see that, but that's got nothing to do with my personal opinion. How is China doing it? China has looked at the economic model of the United States and Germany. Germany is still using the old mercantile model. We make something and we sell it to everybody else. So they keep their taxes very high. You can Google it and see the average net worth of a German citizen is less than that of an Italian. Because they're so afraid of inflation, they oppress their own people. All right. US, it's an open economy. That's what made the US the biggest economy in the world. All right. China is with its Silk Road. This is what China is doing. It's trying to build a consumer-based economy itself.
Mhm.
All right. One of the CEOs of electric cars came out and says China builds better cars.
Mhm.
What do you want me to say? They've done it better. Even when I got called in for the 97 Asian currency crisis, I was called in by the Central Bank of China. And as I said, I went because I wanted to go see the Great Wall. I thought I was going to have to listen to some more bureaucrats,
Mhm.
And when I got there, I was shocked because they were all traders.
Mhm.
They had sent them out to learn. They worked on the dealing desks of London, New York, and Tokyo, and then they went back to run the bank. So actually, when I came back to the States, guys from the Treasury were like, oh, gee, what was it like? You're the first person to ever be called in by the Bank of China. And I stuck the knife in the back and I turned it. I said, it was very interesting. They only hire people with experience. But I mean, this is it. They actually, when I was there, I was taken to a facility, and there were hundreds of people in there downloading everything from the internet. And they brought me in. They asked me, very basic questions. I could understand the mentality of communism trying to become capitalist. There were actually 249 varieties of tea, and they were tracking everything in the country, but they were not interfering. They were studying it. And they asked me, why is this tea selling for like $1 here, but like $5 over there? I said, well, where does it come from? I said, first you have transportation costs. They go, oh, okay, yeah, all right. And I said, then somebody will pay for something more because they like this one better than that. Oh, okay. See, under communism, if it was $1 here, it would have to be $1 there if it cost you $10 to get it there. That's why it failed.
Mhm.
Oh, equality. Sounds wonderful, but it's not efficient. All right. So I got to see it from the very beginning. It was very, very interesting to see that transition.
Mhm.
But China is, it will replace the West. We are still arguing whether Marxism is going to work or not. They already learned it does not. Equal in rights, yes. Equal in wealth, no.
Marty, is because of that alliance, is Russia part of that, let's say, that economic takeover or financial takeover of the West that you just mentioned that China is going to be partaking in?
Yes, I mean it's not going to be the financial capital, but um, Russia is the richest country in the world from a natural resource perspective.
Mm-hmm.
All we get, they call it all Russian propaganda. Well, we have our own propaganda, and it's 10 times worse.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually surprised. Lindsey Graham was on Face the Nation a couple of months ago, and he actually said the truth for once. He said there was a 10 to 12 trillion dollar natural resource under Crimea. It's a gas field. And he said, we can't allow Russia and China to get that. So we're not there for democracy and freedom and all the rest of the stuff, right? This is all about assets. He abandoned we're fighting for freedom and democracy and all this other nonsense that they put out. I don't think we've ever fought about those issues ever, and we don't have democracy ourselves. So that's why, look, I've even seen maps that they want to conquer Russia and they want to carve it up like they did to the Ottoman Empire. The minister of Estonia came out and said Russia's too big and needs to be carved up. There are cartoons from the Victorian era of carving up, China, and who's going to get what. I mean, they did that to the Ottoman Empire in 1916, and that's the Middle East that we got the mess in right now. You have the biggest risk there. People really are not even talking about. It's Turkey. Erdogan is coming out. He's made statements constantly. The West is the evil, blah, blah, blah. The Ottoman Empire was all of that region, including Israel, Egypt, etc. So when Hamas invaded Israel, he cheered. Mm-hmm. Why? Because he wants to be seen as the new caliph for all the Arab world. He wants to resurrect the Ottoman Empire. He said that many times. Mm-hmm. That's why, the fall of Syria was led by rebels funded by Turkey.
Marty, as we think about all these problems that the world is facing, I always like to try to understand what possible solutions are on the other side of that. Do you think physical gold and silver are a solution to store value through these times, or are they headed for tight capital controls?
Look, government, when it's like a wounded animal, it's going to fight to survive. All right. I would be very careful with the gold and silver in the sense of a public storage facility. When they confiscated gold back in Roosevelt did that in 1933. They didn't go house to house and say, give me all the $20 gold pieces you got in your sock drawer. The banks had to turn it over. So the public places had to turn it over. That's why, we still have $20 gold pieces today. They didn't go, door to door. So I would be concerned more about the any public storage facility, things of that nature, even safety deposit boxes in a bank. If you read the fine print, basically putting any cash in there is technically money laundering. You're hiding it from the government. But when you're making a transition from one currency to another in a monetary crisis, all tangible assets make that transition.
Mhm.
Real estate, gold, silver, things of this nature. I would not look at things like Bitcoin or things of that area. I can tell you we had these 2 storms here in Florida. They wouldn't have done very well for you. All right, we lost power. What are you going to do? So I think you have to look at it from that perspective of, like I say, electric cars were blowing up. You know, Bitcoin would have gotten zero. The only thing that you could have bought anything with was cash. They couldn't even take a credit card. No power. That's it. You couldn't even go to a bank and ATM and take anything out. The physical things make the transition. Even if you look at the German hyperinflation when they came out with a new currency in 1925, it was backed by real estate. People back then, what they were doing was basically converting to every other currency but German. So it was a German problem. When we're looking at everything going down, and it's not the dollar. All right, the dollar is probably the last one to fall. Europe is much worse, and Japan may be the first one to end up in that crisis. Yes, we have a large debt, but we also have the biggest economy. And Europe is just a basket case at this stage in the game, and that's why they are pushing for war. They will probably use the excuse of war to default on their debts, as pretty much historically. So, yes, I mean, I would use, but look at gold and silver coin rather than bars. Because I think that's something that's recognizable. The silver, I would prefer to have the old silver coins, which you can still buy by bags, etc. Because there are videos on YouTube. Somebody was offered a chocolate bar and a silver bar, and they took the chocolate. Not everybody knows what it is. The reason I say that the old silver coins, they can look at the date. Oh, I know. Okay, that's good. They wouldn't be able to tell the difference between a 1965 nickel quarter and a 1964 silver one. The average person doesn't know that sort of stuff. So if you're looking at it from a standpoint of being viable, power grids are down, just as we had here in Florida, and you need to buy something. Hey, see, 1964. Oh, yeah, okay, I know they're better than the 65s. So just look at the common denominator of people, not that you're going to have to transact with. So that's why I say in coin form, it's easier for the average person to identify.
Martin, I recently had Judy Shelton on the show, and she brought forward this idea of putting gold out on the yield curve. What do you think about that idea, and does it have practical reality to it?
The main reason like a gold standard doesn't work or anything of this nature is mainly because money supply does have to expand and contract. And that's why Bretton Woods collapsed. You fixed gold at $35, but you didn't limit the amount of dollars you're printing. I think a 3-year-old with a pocket calculator could figure out sooner or later it's going to go bust. All right. it's, I don't think you want money to be gold because it would be more deflationary than anything else. I prefer gold to be an investment free to float on the outside. I mean, the only way a gold standard would even work is if the value of gold fluctuated. Mm-hmm. It can't fix this stuff. I mean, if there's only 10 people and the money supply is $10, we all can have one. But then all of a sudden you have 30 people, but we still only have $10. It becomes deflationary. Mm-hmm. So we have to understand that. Gold. A lot of people have criticized. It was the banks and lending gold, and that suppressed. Gold doesn't earn interest. You have to lend it out to get interest back. All right. So it's been a lot more complicated, in that respect. Mm-hmm. But and I think a lot of the problems, people blame the Fed, etc. Look, it's like you're blaming the gun for killing somebody rather than the guy that pulled the trigger. It's not the Federal Reserve. It's Congress. All right. With each deficit, they fund it. The Treasury issues more bonds, and those bonds become, capital that just pays interest. That's it. So, I mean, it's when you watch the yield curve as you start getting closer to war. All right. Then the premium for long-term increases. All right. The short-term decreases. The Fed can only set the short-term rate. Mm-hmm. That's what quantitative easing was about. The Fed was buying in the 30-year bonds. Okay. In a way, they were hoping to reduce the supply on the long end to lower the interest rate for like mortgages, etc. Okay. All these people, the Fed just created money. No, Congress created the money. All right. And up to 70% of the interest that we have often spent went overseas. You had, China being the biggest debt holder. Well, okay, fine. Whatever you're paying in interest, it's, you get $1 trillion in interest, and 250 billion of that was going over to them. Mm-hmm. Oh, but you want to put tariffs on them. Oh, to stop them. Okay, well, why are we borrowing then? People aren't looking at the full picture. Mm-hmm.
Martin, I really appreciate you coming on and really explaining a lot of these ideas to our audience. Is there anything that you'd like to leave our listeners to think about or to consider before we wrap up?
My biggest concern, I would say, is this covert action to take over the National Guard. It's effectively the slick way of taking the guns away from the people. I mean, you'll be able to have your gun in, personally, but they're taking away the militias. So the states, to unarm basically the states themselves. Why? It was the state militias that enabled the revolution. They know that. All right. So this is, I just look at everything they do from Washington is always in their own self-interest. Mm-hmm. I am concerned that is as Trump takes office, in theory, oh, okay, fine, we should see a complete reversal, blah, 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 whatever. The computer's not showing that. Why? I think we're going to find out come January.
Mhm. Well, a lot can happen between now and January 20th, and I think we need to keep our heads on a swivel. Unfortunately, even as much hope and optimism as I think there is in the country right now, there is a reason, like you said, that markets aren't, let's say, necessarily confirming that.
Yeah, I mean, it's the markets don't lie, basically. And it's just not showing what everybody, I think, would like to see. So we have to be concerned about, I think, rise in authoritarianism. That's definitely on a global scale, because as governments realize they are losing power, they're going to fight back.
Mhm. Martin, again, I really want to thank you for taking the time to explain all of this today for us. For those that would like to see more of Martin's work, your free blog is excellent on your website, armstrongeconomics.com, as well as all of those articles and links are all available on Martin's Twitter handle @StrongEconomics. Martin, thanks again so much.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and take care up there.
You too. This podcast is for general informational purposes only. Nothing on this podcast should be taken as investment advice. Guests on this show are not compensated for their appearance. Listeners are urged to educate themselves and make their own decisions. Do not base any investment decisions on the information contained. To view our full disclaimer, please visit our website.